So welcome back, everybody. In today's episode, we are going to be curing my forge here. And to be honest with you, this is something I had no idea about. Well, it turns out the ceramic fiber in the majority of these forges, they have to have a refractory cement added to them, and there's a step you should take before it in what's called adding a rigidizer. We'll talk about this in a second. I had no idea the first time I fired this up that these are small fibers that can actually become loose, and supposedly they're very, very bad to breathe, not good for your lungs. So you want to make sure that you follow these steps. Luckily, some viewers caught that, told me, and I have not used it since. I need to go ahead and get some refractory cement in here and get this cured because we need to build some more tools and utensils for our fire pit and cooking area out here. Now, there's all different types of forges out there available, but they're going to come with this ceramic fiber right here. You don't really want to mess with this, as I'm finding out, but again, it can make fine particles that are really bad to breathe. Problem is, this stuff is kind of spongy, so if we go to put our refractory cement on there, we're actually going to collapse some of this. So one of the first steps you should take is adding what's called a rigidizer. I'll put a link down in the description. I got mine off of Amazon, as well as everything else that we use today. But this stuff can be brushed on, sprayed on, rolled on, and you can see it says wear a mask. We're going to put some gloves on as well. And this takes 24 hours to cure. So long story short, we're going to spray on every bit of this right here, and it stiffens the fibers up. So tomorrow or the next day, whenever we add our refractory cement, this is nice and stiff, doesn't collapse, and we get all the insulation originally designed in this. Now, some people say you can skip this step, but a lot of people say it's worth taking the time to buy this and do this, even though it is going to extend your use 24 hours before you can get to adding the cement. All right, so since the directions say we can spray it in, I've put some down here in my spray bottle, and we're going to make sure we wet every bit of the surface inside and out. Then we're going to let this cure for at least 24 hours and kind of see if this hardens up. Right now it is actually relatively stiff, but this is supposed to make it even better. All right, so now we're gonna let this set up since we have the outer surface of that blanket sprayed down. It says it's supposed to extend the lifetime of this blanket as well. They don't last forever by hardening up the surface. So once we see this is fully cured in about 24 hours, we'll go ahead and mix up our refractory cement, and I'll show you how we're gonna coat the inside of this. And then we got some cure time with that. So it is a relatively involved process, but it's the right way to do this. All right, so here we are more than 24 hours later. The rigidizer has set up, and I will say, yeah, things feel a lot more firm. It almost just feels like there is a skim coat on the outside of all this stuff. So I feel confident we can go ahead and put our refractory cement on this. I'm probably gonna do it in a couple of layers because trying to put it on really thick, I don't think it's gonna work. So we're gonna put one coat on today, and I think let it dry overnight, put another coat tomorrow, and then really let this dry before we fire it up. But now we're not going to collapse our wool since we put the rigidizer on. So here's the refractory cement that I picked up. We're just going to add it to a bucket, start adding a little water in there, and I'm going to mix it up with a paint stirring stick and maybe even by hand. I'm going to put some gloves on and wear a respirator. And when I get the consistency of, say, peanut butter, I'm stopping, and I'm just going to put this stuff on with gloves and by hand. I've watched a lot of people do this online with paint brushes and everything else, and the easiest method I see is just put some gloves on, scoop this stuff out, and just put it in every nook and cranny. I'm not looking for a perfectly smooth finish here because we're going to put our fire bricks back in there later on, and that's what we put our metal on. All right, so I have a consistency that I just kind of guessed at. It's almost like ice cream, just barely holds on. That seems good enough. So I'm about to make a heck of a mess, but that's okay. We're just gonna start scooping this out by hand, putting it wherever we want. This just seems like the easier thing to do. Even though that rigidizer has kind of firmed up all the fibers and ends, Definitely want to focus on these ends. I'd imagine that's where the majority of the loose stuff is going to be anyways. Get that sealed up nice. Make sure I get in here really good around all these gas inlet holes and seal up any fibers in there as well. It's a little messy, but the glove technique feels like the right way to put this stuff on. There's so many little nooks and crannies to get in. I don't think brushing this on would work very well at all. I'm going to make sure I don't see any exposed fibers anywhere in here. And we're going to let this dry up at least overnight, maybe a couple of days. And when this feels nice and hardened up, I'm going to do this again, put another light skim coat on to make for sure I got some good thickness and no exposed fibers. All right, so here we are about a week later, and the first coat that I put on, it was relatively thick, 1/4+ inch, and I let it dry for a couple days, and that wound up with some cracks in it. I kind of expected that. Plus, in a couple spots, I could still push on it and see some minor flecks of the fabric underneath. So I come back and did exactly what you already seen me do. Mixed up again, and I put another thick skim coat over top of the first coat after it dried for a few days. Then I let this dry for, y'all, probably a week plus at this point, because I did not want to fire this up and put a lot of heat while there was still moisture in the cement. That can actually cause some pretty serious problems. You definitely don't want that moisture to heat up and steam out, so I let this dry really, really well. Now, it's not as smooth as I would like to see, and I still have some very minor cracks, but keep in mind that's on the second coat, not on the first coat. So we have no exposed fibers, and we're good to go. Now, I just put all this in by hand. That's why it's got the rough texture. Doesn't matter because we're about to put the fire bricks in, but you could come back with something like a putty knife, for example, and smooth this all out if the final texture bothers you. I could even put a third coat in here. If I start seeing any major cracking or chipping, I'll for sure do that and then let this dry again for many, many days. But as of right now, I mean, stuff is solid. There's no flecks, there's no exposed fibers anywhere. There's 2 coats on here. I think we're good to go. All right, so all I've got to do is get my fire brick in here. I definitely have less working room now that we did this. Don't forget, this is something you absolutely have to do for safety reasons. All right, there's both our bricks in there. I mean, I still got 3.5, 4 inches. It's not like I'm putting steel in there that thick. Most of the stuff I'm putting in here is small rod stock, like 1/4 to a 1/2 inch, maybe 3/4 of an inch, some rebar and other things such as that. So now we're at the point I'm gonna fire this up, run the temperature on low for just a little bit, monitor, make sure there's no cracking, and then, well, we're gonna turn it on up and I'm going to work. All right, hopefully you enjoyed this process and hopefully it educated you, because it educated me. Don't forget, do not run any of these with that wool in there without first coating them. The rigidizer is recommended, but not necessary, but you definitely do want to make your fibers more rigid so you have less flexing and less cracking in all the cement that you're going to put in there. So I recommend doing that. I know a lot of people are going to get their forge in, they're going to be relatively impatient, which is dangerous, so we're going to want to fire it up like I accidentally did without educating themselves and just go to town. Don't do that. Put your rigidizer on, wait about 1 day, and then put a thick coat of cement in. Is what worked well for me. Let that dry for a couple days, put another coat in there, and if all looks well, no flexing, no major cracking, no exposed fibers especially, well, let it dry a few more days. You want to see the color change. You want to make sure all the moisture's out. Now we can put our fire bricks in, fire this up, let it warm up for a while, put this thing to work. So on the next episode, we're going to make something specific that I need for our outdoor cooking fire pit. We'll catch you on the next one.